Hello and welcome to the Haunted Book Club. It is addition to the chat, the book club itself. It's me, Gav Cross, and
It's me, John Reppion.
now before we proceed, content warning. The story we will be covering tonight does discuss a horrific and sudden illness. And John Reppion has been struck down with a horrific and sudden illness. He is very poorly. He is held up almost entirely by Lemsip. So if you do hear mysterious sounds in the background, it could either be that haunted bathroom of yours, or it's John's sniffles. Either way, please be aware. Are you okay, John?
I'm fine. I'll be okay. It's only if I laugh, so I should be all right, because nothing funny's going to happen.
No, there'll be no laughs here. We're not here to enjoy ourselves. But we are here live Tuesdays, 9 p.m. on Substack. You might be listening back. Thank you ever so much. If you are definitely wonderful. A little click, a like, a comment, that would really, really help us. We've got a lovely live set of book clubbers here already. And so really, it falls to us to introduce what tonight's story is. John, what have we asked people to look at, to listen to for tonight?
So tonight, hopefully you've watched Gav's reading of it. It's The Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe, and it's a nice short one, actually. Much shorter than last week's, so you've got no excuse.
Well, Chris Williams of this parish did send us a lovely message saying he was very grateful for a short 7-page story. But before we started, I asked people, and people have read and listened to it. Clare has read and listened to 2 different versions. Another Clare has watched, read, and listened to it that many times. Rachel dug out their old copy of it, illustrated by Gris Grimley. A beautiful, beautiful version. I've got my copy illustrated by Harry Clarke. This impression here, Tales of Mystery and Imagination, Edgar Allan Poe, pocket version. Chris read the story, listened to it twice, watched the film, read the comic adaptation of the film. And that is commitment. Absolutely.
It is.
So if you're listening to this back and you haven't read or listened to The Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe, pause it now, go off, have a listen, and come back. You won't miss out. If you're here live and you haven't, well, spoilers ahead. I'm very glad to confirm, however, John, that Poe is Barry's favourite Teletubby. I just said that in the chat. Thank you very much. Barry has been saving that one all week. Okay. Okay, so we've got this classic tale, Edgar Allan Poe. I think lots of people haven't read it, but are very aware of it. In this first run of Haunted Book Clubs, we've chosen the stories, and we fully intend to have a conversation with people about what comes up. But John, we're calling this John's Dead Talk. Why did we pick this story, and what do you know about it?
Okay, so the Masque of the Red Death, a deadly plague known as the Red Death, is sweeping through the population. Prince Prospero decides now would be a good time to throw a party in his castle. He throws this big masked ball. I think it's 7 months after they've all holed themselves up in this castle. 6 months maybe. He's got all these 7 grand rooms. Each one is a different colour. It's decorated spectacularly. And they're going to just party their way through this lockdown. But the Red Death needs no invitation. That is basically the entire story.
There you go. So before we move on, what I'd like to ask you is, and you don't have to, we want to know if you enjoyed the story, and you could type, if you wish, woohoo, or if you didn't really like the story, and you could type in the chat, boo-hoo. Either way, you could put a thumbs up or thumbs down. You could type, I liked it. You could type, it was all right. You can type, I'm ambivalent, whatever you want. But is it for you a story that made you go woohoo, or was it a boo-hoo? It'd be very nice, and I'll reflect on it in a little bit. As you type it in, if you can, then we'll reflect on that afterwards. But what we do with the Haunted Book Club is that John's going to tell us a little bit about the story, a little bit about the context, and then we're going to open it up for a big chat. And we would like you to join in with that. So be thinking about what you want to say. Okay, John.
So, Edgar Allan Poe. He's an 18th century American poet, author, literary critic. Poe's poem, The Raven, is probably what he's best known for. And I realised that I probably first heard The Raven on the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror in 1990, which means that I'm not as old as I look. So people say that Poe invented a lot of things. He gets a lot of credit for a lot of different things. They say he invented the modern detective novel with his consulting detective, C. Auguste Dupin. Appeared in 3 stories, most famously Murders in the Rue Morgue. And Dupin actually gets mentioned in the very first Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet, as a contemporary of Holmes's. So obviously Holmes was aware of his work, and Conan Doyle was aware of Poe's kind of legacy there with inventing that. People say Poe invented science fiction with his story The Balloon Hoax, which is a really silly title. They say he invented a lot of things. But basically what Poe is best known for, and what we all think of him as, he's the goth granddaddy. Edgar Allan Poe, he's Mr. Halloween. Without Edgar Allan Poe, we wouldn't have Scooby-Doo or the Addams Family or Vincent Price or this whole New England American Gothic thing, which becomes this massive part of American identity and global culture, more or less comes directly from Poe. He's more important than Alice Cooper or even Stephen King in kind of that respect. I'd argue that it's basically the Salem witch trials, the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and Edgar Allan Poe is sets the entire kind of aesthetic for the blueprint for that Gothic version of North America that's become kind of globally recognized. So that's who Poe is as a brand. Very American in that sense. The Masque of the Red Death isn't set in America. It's set in this kind of fantasy medieval Europe, which a lot of the romantic Gothic fiction of the time was. But I don't think that the setting is really that important, and I don't think that the characters are really that important in the same way they are in, thinking about last time, and The Signalman. This isn't really about place or specific people. What this essentially is, The Masque of the Red Death, is like a dark fairy tale, more than anything else. And on the one hand, obviously, The Masque of the Red Death it's a story about mortality. It's a story about death. It's the inescapable nature of death. You've got this fantastic stuff with the chime of this clock in the final room, stopping the revelry every time. Everybody has to stop dancing. Everybody has to stop doing what they're doing as the clock chimes, and then they get on with it. So time marches on until at last death arrives. That is the message of the story. But it's not subtle. But Poe isn't just being dramatic or needlessly morbid or sulky. He was somebody who was very familiar with death, and even with literal plague in his own lifetime. So during the 1800s, Poe actually lived through a global pandemic, which was cholera. Cholera swept right across the world. It killed 300,000 people, probably a lot more. And it struck Baltimore, where Poe lived, in the early 1830s, and actually returned in the late 1840s after The Masque of the Red Death had been published. Poe's birth mother, his foster mother, his brother, they all died of tuberculosis, which is a disease that affects the lungs. It causes the sufferer to cough up blood. So, there's an obvious link between the idea of tuberculosis and the idea of the Red Death. Poe's wife, Virginia, was suffering from tuberculosis when he wrote the story. She died 5 years later after a very long illness. So Poe's Gothicness, his obsession with the morbid and the tragic and the doomed, wasn't some kind of huffy teenage affectation. He was very much in the thick of this very blood and guts life and death existence. Equally, I think this is possibly something we can return to later, it struck me, he was somebody who was trying to make the best of a life that he knew was finite with his ailing wife, and I think that puts Prince Prospero in perhaps a different perspective, because there's a temptation to think of him as an evil rich bad guy, but actually, does he do anything particularly evil, or is he just kind of trying to make the best of the time he has before everything, goes pear-shaped? But I don't know, that's something to think about later. Poe wrote in a lot of different genres, and as you'd expect, his style changed somewhat depending on what he was trying to convey. The Masque of the Red Death isn't a poem, obviously, but it's poetic, it's lyrical, and I think that is the beauty of Poe's writing, is how lyrical it is. The story, once you take away the means of telling it, once you take away Poe's language, is a pretty simple story. It's not complicated, pretty straightforward. There's one big reveal, which, to be honest, you can probably guess what's going to happen quite a while before it happens. But it is a good story. I believe it's a good story. Why is it a good story? And I think the thing about the beauty of Poe is the language he uses and the way he uses it. There are people who, when they read words on a page, when they read prose, they have this thing where they get this kind of 3D rendering in their heads. It's not even a film. It's like virtual reality. They're immersed within the story, and they move around within it. I haven't got that. That doesn't happen to me. But what I think I have is something closer to an illustrated novel. So I get sort of snapshots of things. I'll get freeze frames. I get scenes. I get people, but I don't have sights and sounds and things. I can't walk about in the world. And I've always thought that Poe's style of writing is sort of really well tailored to people whose heads work that way. Now, everybody's heads work differently, and you might completely disagree with it, but it's why I feel like I've always got on with Poe really well, because his writing in The Masque of the Red Death, his writing does two things simultaneously, which is he paints vivid and detailed pictures. He explains things. He explains the layouts of these rooms, their decor. He really wants you to understand how all of that works. But he also weaves his words into this kind of lace work, this really beautiful, fascinating pattern of words. And I think the words become more interesting than the story sometimes. So, like, things like the little quote, the Raberesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies such as a madman fashions. There, there were much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the seven chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and these, the dreams, writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their footsteps. Now, what he's conveying is pretty simple, but how he's conveying it is incredible.
So he likes it a bit. He likes it a bit saucy as well, doesn't he?
He does like it a bit saucy, but like I think style over substance is an insult. It's a criticism, isn't it? But I think that I think it could be applied to The Masque of the Red Death in a non-derogatory way, in as much as it is not about the story that's told, it's about how beautifully it's told. And the way that Poe uses language, as always, it kind of almost makes me salivate. Like, I can't really express how good his use of language is. So I think that why this is a good story is really how it's told, not what is being told.
Okay, so if I just want to hold it there, because I want to reflect on some of the things you said, some of the things that have already been said when I asked the question, and my take on it as well. It's a classic story. But This is a very honest hot take. It did leave me a little bit cold. I get its style over substance. It's florid. Edgar Allan Poe is all about the beauty of the language. It's part of that writing, and not everybody was the same. Why use one word when 5 words would do the job?
Yeah.
But to me, the one thing I missed in the whole story was that there's no one to like. There's there's no empathy. I have no empathy, and it's another one of those stories like Dracula. No, I'll come back to Dracula. One of those stories where when everybody dies, I'm quite happy. I was not left because it was so tight on this group of aristocrats. It is another one of those classic like fairy tales where we didn't care. We didn't find out about all the people because there's no way those aristocrats weren't walled up with a load of povos who had to do all the work. I just didn't have empathy, and I was quite happy when the Prince Prospero got it, and I was even happy when they all went. I would have been happy if the povos been able to get out, but I understand that. So I think it's classic. I think it's amazing. I think it is that Gothic masterpiece, but I didn't care about them. However, that's my opinion. That's yours. That's mine. So I did ask who found it woohoo and boohoo. There were some boohoos. There were some woohoos as well. So I want you, if you would like, to take a moment to type in your kind of snapshot opinion. John's given his very thoughtful opinion and nothing I disagree with. I've given you my grubby little, it's really good, but couldn't it be a little bit better for a classic? But I want to know what your considered thoughtful response is as well, whilst we carry on. So Annie has agreed with me. You're my favourite. It left you cold. Josie liked the drama of it, and it was drama. It is the Gothic, isn't it? We can see that picture of them coming through, and it was a bit sexy, and that's not even a word I like using. And when I say that kind of from a distance, it's like all the writhing bodies and all the things they got up to, and we know what they've been doing for months, and so that's another reason why I think I'm good. I'm glad they're all dead.
Well, pack it in, you dirty beggars.
Yeah, Claire liked the words used and had to look some of them up. Absolutely, I had to look some of them up as well, and the references. And there's like there's a reference to a theatre play from the early 19th century, things like that. And I completely agree with you. There's nothing wrong with being presented with a word or an idea or a context that you don't know.
No, it's brilliant.
Says, yes, they didn't all die quick enough. If I was remotely related to his own pretty tragic trail, imagine if it was a little family having a cherished time together instead and then dying. Yeah, that would have been a better story, Claire. I agree. Let's paint the picture of a little cherished family and then have themselves cough up blood. Rachel says, main reason I love it is exactly what John mentioned about living in the piece. I very much do that, and this piece is just so easy to live in. And also love that they all get what they deserve, and Red Death is just doing what comes natural. Yeah, I agree with that. There is a natural justice to it, isn't there? There is that, because we do know that in times of plague, the wealthy took themselves off to their properties. We know that from, references in plagues in London and England, yeah. So Rachel agrees with both of us. That is the kind of fence sitting we like here, because we don't want anybody to fall out at all. And Josie says, lockdown vibes, like when the celebs and politicians had their parties and it came back to bite them. Oh, I hadn't made that connection. So I feel it was set up for us to want them to die. Yes. And Chris's favourite word was habiliments. That is one of the ones I looked up.
Yes.
It's just
habiliments is really good.
It's a posh word for clothes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which then, I'm guessing, is the link to haberdashery.
Yes, presumably so.
Which is a word
I really liked.
I only ever think of "Are you being served?" when I say that word. So, John, we got a range of opinions. Those that agree with you, but those who still feel it was left a bit cold, which buys into your theory of style over substance. Yeah, give us some more.
Well, really, I think it's an intro. It was hard to pick a Poe story, wasn't it? And we had this conversation that there are other Poe stories we could have done, and there are stories such as The Pit and the Pendulum. There are stories like Premature Burial, and they're a lot more visceral. This isn't so visceral. This doesn't kind of. I suppose the description of the Red Death is very visceral in itself, but you don't suddenly. Something that Poe does in some of his other stories is he puts you in the place of the victim, and even if it's even if it's a person who is the bad guy, you are suddenly in seeing things from their point of view. So the pit and the pendulum is kind of the obvious one of that. So in a way, I feel like we haven't picked the best Poe story here. I mean, it's very hard to pick the best Poe story, but I think what's really interesting about it is this idea that it is like a dark fairy tale. Apparently, Poe didn't like the idea that people said it was an allegory. He was like, he just didn't like allegories. It wasn't an allegory, it was just a story about this. But it does just feel like a dark fairy tale, doesn't it? But the obviously Poe, one of the things that I realized, I already knew about Poe's death. So Poe had a very strange death, an unexplained death. And I thought that the explanation for Poe's death was this thing that used to be called cooping or coopering, which was basically he was found insensible in a bar, and he was wearing clothes that weren't his clothes. The idea was that he'd swapped his clothes so that he could vote for the same candidate in some election several times, pretending to be different people, and he'd been bribed with drink to do that, and he'd basically got alcohol poisoning or whatever. That's what I thought had happened. The more I looked into it, the more I found out the whole thing about him dying as a drunkard. Now, I know that you've watched a documentary about this recently, so you might have a different opinion, but the whole thing about him dying as a drunkard and being this terrible hellraiser and everything actually seems to be a myth, but a deliberately perpetrated myth, because the doctor who was responsible for treating him said a lot of weird things that didn't make sense about how he had come into his care, and that Poe's aunt had asked him to look after him when Poe's aunt didn't know he was ill, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of strange stuff, but there's this whole thing that after Poe died, this anonymous obituary went out. And it turned out that it was written by this guy called Rufus Wilmot Griswold, who was a former colleague of Poe's, but it went out anonymously originally. And basically it said, Edgar Allan Poe's dead. Nobody's really going to mourn him because he was a dickhead. And that was published everywhere. This guy, Griswold, then went on to basically trick Poe's aunt into saying that he was his literary executor, so he had the rights to publish Poe's stuff. And the year after Poe died, he published this anthology of Poe stuff with a bit in it called Memoir of the Author that Griswold put together himself, partly with letters that were later proved to be forged and rewritten by Griswold, saying that Poe was this drunken, drug-addled madman, and nobody could cope with him. But the hilarious thing about all of this is, because Poe was the goth granddaddy, because Poe's, then it never did his reputation any harm. In fact, everybody thought, well, it's a bit like, Lord Byron, or he's pretty sexy, this. And so it actually ended up doing Poe loads of favours. Now, all of it, the substance of it has not ever really been proved, whether he was this kind of drug-addled alcoholic or what. But this guy who tried to slight him from the second he died, basically did him the biggest favour ever. And nobody remembers Rufus Wilmot Griswold. I had to look his name up. I had to just look at his name again there. Nobody remembers him. So I think that's such a sort of fantastic triumph for Poe to have been so maligned, and that to have been kind of partly the making of him after death.
Yeah, perhaps we'll refer to this in a bit. If you are interested in finding out more about Poe, there is a 3-hour documentary in 2 parts on Amazon Prime, which was obviously funded, privately, and is full of people that think he's amazing. It's a very unreconstructed one. And it does touch on this bit. But going back to what people are saying, and please pick up on anything that I'm saying or John's saying. We keep throwing in your thoughts, keep throwing in what you how you responded to it. It's what we want to hear, what you think as well. Clare, another Clare. This is a third Clare. This Clare comment I'm coming is from a Clare that I've not yet quoted. Hello, Clare.
New Clare.
Yeah, well, I don't want to hierarchy the Clares, because if the Clares turn, I think there's more of them than there is of us. So right now we're
Good point.
teetering on a Clare revolution. It's beautiful writing, yes, says Clare. It's beautiful writing, but for me, not a good story. I think it's because all the descriptions make it unbalanced. There's no dialogue or characters other than the prince. Yeah, it is the prince's story, and that's again leans into the fairy tale idea. And that, agree. Claire F says Claire W. Hard to follow because of all of that, but and I like Claire's comment. And inviting 1,000 of his best friends made me laugh. Yeah, I struggled with 3. I don't think I've got that, but yeah, that notion I did. But that's why I think it's a very critical piece of the aristocracy. And you're right. It is set in a fictional kind of European world. But he's very much a writer of that American move. Right, we will probably come back to Poe if we carry on with this. I'd like to know what other Edgar Allan Poe's people like and what they prefer and what they suggest we could look at, or what your favourites are as well. And also, I want to ask this question of everybody because some of it isn't that nice. In these chats, should we talk about the writers themselves? Do you want to know or to discuss? Do you want to throw in what you know about the writer? And because, like many authors of today and back then, they're controversial people because they're of their time and they're humans and they're flawed, or they're just generally awful. So it'd be interesting to know any more thoughts on this story, what your favorite Poe is and why, what you think of him and what you know about him. Poe is one of the only poets that I'm able to actually understand, says Rachel. The language and rhythm seems to work very well with me personally. I get you. I'll answer my question, my own question. For me, the Raven and Telltale Heart are 2 of the finest pieces of writing. And both of them being first person narratives. So they do appeal to me as a performer, perhaps. They're both very poetic. They're both gruesome. They're both, well, maybe The Raven less so. I think it's a very sad poem, but they just resonate for me. To me, those are the 2 greatest. Telltale Heart in particular. Telltale Heart is on my wish list of performing. Definitely. Yes to the context. It makes me appreciate the story more. Yes to writer Goss. Yes to the author. So, okay, question. I'd like to throw this to the book clubbers. Are there any thoughts about what the different colour rooms represent, if anything? That was one of my questions. I love talking about the authors. Telltale Heart has always stayed with me. Yeah, it always has. I read it when I was young, but then I saw Stephen Burkoff perform it, and it just took my breath away. And then I saw Stephen Burkoff perform it again about a year later, and it was terrible. My favorite.
I saw it on The Simpsons. It was on The Simpsons.
Yeah,
I only know about Edgar Allan Poe from The Simpsons.
I didn't watch The Simpsons in the 90s, John. I was busy.
You were busy
drinking. Anne says, I love hearing history of the writers. Gives so much insight. I might have said that. Fall of the House of Usher. Yes. Read quite young.
Yes.
And the twist actually caught me first time. Absolutely. I haven't got round to watching the modern contemporary adaptation of that, but I quite fancy it. Yeah. All right. Let's talk a bit about Poe. Again, throw in what you know about Poe. I watched this documentary recently. I don't know if I should be open. How open should I be? I'm going to say something terrible. And I said this to you, John. I'm a neurodivergent grown-up, recently diagnosed. And one of the awful things that we do, and we should never do, is that we can sniff out other neurodivergents and we diagnose when we shouldn't. It's irresponsible. It's an awful thing. But I'm telling you now, Edgar Allan Poe was a complex neurodivergent individual. All the descriptions of his life, how he treated people, his obsessions, most definitely. How he had very few friends. Hello. How people got fed up with him after a while. How he got his sense of justice, and how he would, because he was a critic as well as a writer, so he was quite prepared to write terrible things about contemporaries. So surprise, surprise, when he died, people who worked with him who didn't like what he said turned on him.
Yeah, well, that's why that is why he fell out with Griswold, wasn't it? Because Griswold had asked him to review something, and he ended up doing a kind of slightly middling review of it, I think, grudgingly. But then in his correspondence with other people, which I presume somebody must have gone, "Oh, look what he's written here." Like he said, it was a load of rubbish what he'd reviewed, and so Griswold had a cob on with him for the rest of his life. So yeah, he really didn't, like you say, it's the sense of justice thing, isn't it? It's that, well, why would he put his name to anything? Why would he say any of these things if they weren't true? And why would he publicly go out on a kind of, stick his neck out for anybody if he didn't really mean it? And that obviously, well, I was going to say it came back to bite him, but it didn't really, did it? It sort of worked out for him.
Because he was dead. But also another classic, highly revered, struggled financially when he was alive.
Yeah.
That's always a heartbreaking thing, isn't it? I think, says Clare, I was swayed into loving his character more by the portrayal of him in Altered Carbon in recent years. Now, that's a name of a show I'm aware of, but I've not watched. Would you recommend it, Clare? I know it's finished. Right, so let's throw in this, which is not pleasant. He did marry his wife, who he was with till her demise when she was 13. And in this documentary, they bent over backwards talking about how, it was probably a non-physical relationship for a long time. But this was the 19th century. This is post-Enlightenment. And I know it was America. No disrespect. Some disrespect. But that still, because lots of writers at the time were writing about how that's not a right thing to do. So that's a layer of complexity that once I know the framing of that. How old was he? He was 30, I think. I'll have to check.
Was she not a distant cousin of his as well?
I think she might have been a first cousin.
Oh, not very distant then.
Maybe not. Spouse, Virginia, first cousin. Publicly married when Virginia Clem was 13 and Poe was 27. Biographers disagree as to the nature of the couple's relationship. Though their marriage was loving, some biographers suggest they viewed one another more like brother and sister. Okay. There's lots of evidence of a loving relationship until they died, and lots of that. But it does, once, for me, like somebody said, when you know about the writer and the context, it puts things into context. So, of course, he may have written about tuberculosis and the suffering and death of his mother and brother and his wife from this outbreak. But, I don't know. Am I going too far? Is that wrong of me, John? Genuine question. Is that wrong of me, book clubbers?
I don't think it's wrong of you. I think it's I think it's it's just how it grabs you kind of thing, isn't it? And I don't want to, we don't want to start doing the whole separate the art from the artist and get into all of that at all. But I mean, basically, if it gives you the ick, if something gives you the ick, then you've got the ick, haven't you? That's it. I'm not going to argue you out of your ick.
It's so contemporary of you, John. Yes. Young people like Josie can use the term comfortably, icky. No, I don't know. Maybe I'm overblowing it because I think he's an incredible writer. But you're right. It's Rachel saying there's a notion of a power dynamic there. But then the flip side of me says is, maybe their relationship was a very loving one, and it was a very codependent one, and he lived very happily with her and her mother, and lived with her mother beyond that.
Yeah, I think that there's, like you said, the documentary, everybody's going to bend over backwards to say it's a non-physical relationship and all of this, and I think, M.R. James is the person who kind of I've been to kind of conferences about, and the sort of ghost story author I know the most about kind of academically, and have spoken with academics about seeing people give talks. And I think it's a similar thing where people say you don't know stuff about their private life. Was M.L. James gay? Is the big thing that comes up. And some people will argue that he definitely wasn't for these reasons, or he definitely was for these reasons. And I always just think, well, no, you don't know, do you? So, like, why are we bothering? Like, and like, I don't mean that in a glib way, but like the stuff about, yeah, it basically it's conspicuous when everybody starts to bend over backwards and say it's a non-physical relationship with Poe and his 13-year-old wife, and you're like, well, how did you know that? But you know, we don't. I don't know what their relationship was like, and it seems that they at least stayed together and all the rest of it. So, as dubious and as unpleasant as it seems, by then it that's what
You
it
were going
was,
to
isn't it?
say modern standards, weren't you?
No, no, I wouldn't ever say modern standards. We had this conversation about modern standards the other day, didn't we? Which is that if we should judge modern um, we should judge modern billionaires by modern standards because we judge Victorian millionaires by modern standards, and we go, well, they did do a lot of good, but they did a lot of bad, and now we just go like, oh, well, they just do a lot of bad. So they don't build schools or anything like that anymore, do they?
We've gone right off topic, but I love it. Let's drag ourselves back onto topic. I'm going to ask people. We're going to categorize it, people. Let's categorize it and let's turn this into something reductive. Let's give it a score. All right. So, final thoughts on Edgar Allan Poe and the Red Death. Let's give it a score. So, we've got classifications to categorize it now. Is it a classic ghost story? Is it a haunted house or place? Is it a physical creature or monster? Is it a cursed or a haunted object? Is it weird fiction? Is it demonic or otherworldly? Is it psychic and spiritualist in its way? And is it not necessarily paranormal, but there is an unreliable narrator? How would we categorize this story? And what I'm going to ask people to do is to have a think about that and type it in before you give us your opinion, John, because your opinion is held in high regard by me. We have frozen. Have we frozen for everybody? Please let us know. And then we want to give it a scare factor out of 5. How scary was it? Okay, how scary out of 5 was it as a story to read? And a creep factor. How much, when you were reading the story, did it give you that kind of, when something really gives you the creeps as you're reading it? Again, out of 5. And then I'll go over this again, don't worry. And a satisfaction level. How satisfied were you with the story? How long did it stay with you? So, what classification would you give it? How scary out of 5 would you put it? Scare factor. How creepy at the time when you were reading it? How much did it make you feel? Ooh, need to define that better. And how satisfied were you overall? So, we got Claire W saying it's weird fiction. Yes, and 1 out of 5 for scares. 1 out of scares. That's quite let's have a couple more before I ask you, John. Let's see what else have we got. I'm gonna write mine down. I'm literally gonna write it down because I'm gonna commit to it. Okay, I'm gonna give it that out of for a scare, and I'm gonna give it this for creepiness, and I'm gonna give it this for how it stays within. I think it is that category. All right. Rachel says scare factor 1 out of 5, but 3 out of 5 for creep factor. It gave Rachel the creeps. Claire, 2 out of 5 for creepiness. Right. As you're typing, they will come in. Visualization factor. This is interesting. 5 out of 5. Going well rouged there. John, you were saying the same thing, and you were saying that some people see that way. So Rachel is obviously sees things that way, same as you.
Yeah.
Interests me. Claire W is saying 4 out of 5 stayed with me for florid language. Florid is a very florid and appropriate word to use. All right, and as people are typing this in, Chris thinks it's paranormal. It's 1 for scare for him, 3 for creep, 4 for staying with him, 4 for the satisfaction level. And Barry, 0 out of 5, not scary. 0.5 for creep, because Barry's a big boy. Rouge, that's all right. I might have said something else. Right. Scare, 1 for Josie, 2 for what stays with, and 3 for the satisfaction. Right. Annie says weird fiction is a good description. 1 for the scare. No one was scared by this. because it wasn't. But then 3 because it was creepy. It was creepy. John, what are you saying?
I think, it's me who's come up with the categories, and I'm sort of wishing there was like a dark fairy tale one because I feel like that really fits into. But I guess it is weird fiction, isn't it? Because basically at the end, spoiler, when the costume is opened, there is nothing inside, so there is no, you know, there is nothing that's been kind of piloting the Red Death thing around. So yeah, it's not a ghost. It's so I suppose it is weird fiction. Let's call it weird fiction.
Weird fiction.
I agree. I agree. It's not particularly scary. So I mean, like, yeah, maybe two out of five.
I would have
Creepy.
put it as weird fiction, and also I put 2 for the scare factor because, but it might have been a subsequent reading post COVID. I
Mm.
don't know. I don't because I remember reading it and thinking, it's all right, but I did find it quite scary. That picture painted. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, John, how creepy was it for you?
I'd say it's a 3 out of 5. It is creepy, isn't it? It's a good old creeper. But not.
What I found creepy was that, and Claire's just putting it. Couldn't help comparing it to Boris and the lockdown parties. Um,
Yeah.
I, I think that's what made it creepy for me. It's like like in The Shining, when you see those scenes from the massively cut elements of all the people in their tuxedos and bear costumes, all obviously up to all the weird stuff in all the rooms. There's a whole hour of that in a version that was cut together but never released in the UK. That's what made it creepy for me. The kind of the costumes and the masks, and what was going on in those curtained rooms, and it was just one long fest in that abbey. And the fact that it was in an abbey, and it was these posh, and that that like some 1960s Star Trek science fiction, there is a lot of scantily clad, handsome young men and women with trays of whatever. You'd like a Freddie Mercury party with small people walking around with silver platters of illegal substances and champagne. So to me, that was really creepy because that is a description of the behaviour of the twisted aristocracy.
Yeah.
Really, that did get to me. Do I have a bleep button? No, but I work a lot with young people. um, Josie says, we've lived through it, can't scare us anymore. That is a strong soldier there.
That's
Rachel
true. That's
says,
true.
could you not argue it's still a creature, very modern, but plagues are made of living virus? It's a good argument to make. The
Mm.
personification, though, it's a human form corpse personification of this Red Death in its, let's all say it together, people, in its grave habiliments. Right, John, how would you give it for satisfaction level? What would you give that?
4 out of 5, I reckon, because
Oh,
it's well rounded, isn't it? It does what it sets out to do.
okay. All right, we're going to argue about this. We got, it's weird fiction that if you aggregate it a bit, I think scare factor 1.5 out of 5. People weren't scared. However,
No.
it have a creep factor to it. So I'm going to say 2.5 because I think for me there's so 2.5 is the aggregate of that. What do you think about that, people? So 1.5 out of 5. I don't like halves, but we're stuck with it. Why don't we just make it out of 10? Uh, um, the creep, and then I'm going to put 3 for satisfaction level as an aggregate of what everybody. For some people, yeah, it stayed with them, but for others, oh no, it's quite. I'm going to put 4 out of 5 actually, because there's some 5s, there's some 4s. It stayed with people, so 4 out of 5 for the satisfaction level. I don't know what any of this means, and we might abandon it in later shows. But I just have this dream of making a top trumps. And creep factor is enhanced when I hear other people talk about it, as I don't think in pictures. I don't really think in pictures either, Claire. No, I don't have that. I'm a bit envious. I kind of struggled to see it in my head, but that might be because I'm affected by the film version that I saw. Chris, You said you watched a film again. I've not seen it for years. Imagine the illustrations to top Trump horror stories. If only I knew people who were illustrators who'd want to do something silly and fun. Huh? Yes. Chris.
But you were saying about the you've got the edition there with the Harry Clarke
Yes.
illustrations, and I've got a different edition of the same book, but those have always really stuck with me.
Yeah. I don't know if you can see that, how clearly you can see that. If you go to the
They're
Wikipedia,
fantastic.
if you go to the Wikipedia page, there's a rendition of that for this story, the Wikipedia for the Masque of the Red Death. Okie dokie. So, should we start to pull it together? Because we've gone on quite a bit now. I don't want to edit it too much. Time for final thoughts as well. We do our final business. John, you've been a brave little soldier. You've hardly sniffed and you've hardly coughed. Thank you. I hope the Red Death does not take you on the way home.
That's very kind. You said that as if you were withholding judgment on whether you did or not.
I know that's because I'm not very nice. Rachel, yes, if you could take a picture and share it. Obviously, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, the Haunted Book Club. You can see them via my things. I'd love to see those. It'd be good to see them, good to share them. I'll take a photo of this one and drop it in the Facebook group, the Haunted Book Club Facebook group. There is a link tree to everything that we do. Obviously, this is on a subscription feed. It's always going to be free here on Substack, on YouTube, Spotify, and audio-only podcasts. If you could tell people about it, share it, like it, subscribe, leave a review, that would help, and it would help keep us going forward. So now, some any other business, John. I've got a few items of any other business. If anybody else has got any other business, we're going to wrap this up in a moment, and then we're going to do what we call the afterlife, where we can just chat nonsense and it won't be saved. You can say what you want then. Right, couple of things. It's still on the calendar, but unfortunately, the Norton Priory March the 21st gig is not happening. That's my admin error, but it will be happening on the 18th of April. Same story, same place. The live Haunted Book Club, Norton Priory, April the 18th now. If you've bought a ticket, you should have got an email telling you about this and a refund. And I'm so apologetic. This is an ADHD error on my behalf. I wrote it in my diary wrong. 18th of April. Portico Library we're doing, and we're in negotiations to do this in other places. And if you can think of places that would like a live Haunted Book Club, please let us know. John, any final thoughts from you?
That I probably need to take some more Lemsips. That's my final thought.
Fair enough. We will be back in 2 weeks' time with The Eyes by Edith Wharton. Next Monday, we will release me reading it. You don't have to listen to that. You can download it, read it, buy it, find other versions. And then 2 weeks today, we will be back here for the Haunted Book Club with The Eyes by Edith Wharton. We're going to stick around and chat with people if you want to. You don't have to stay. You can go for the afterlife. But other than that, thank you for listening. Thank you for getting this far. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for all of our live chatters. It does make me think about stories differently, John. I don't know. How about you? Does it change your thoughts or?
Yeah, definitely. It's lovely to be part of this book group. If I wasn't one of the people doing it, I'd be one of the people joining in.
Yeah, and I think there's a shared enthusiasm for this weird, odd supernatural fiction. So we'll be back with The Eyes with Edith Wharton in 2 weeks' time. Thank you very much. Stay in touch. Don't look behind you in the dark. Keep your light on. 24 hours. You'll be okay. You'll be okay. You'll probably be okay.